Okay, let's unpack this. I want you to picture the scene because it is one of those chaotic moments in the history of the Western world. It's September 1666. London is literally burning to the ground. The Great Fire is
Hey,
raging.
just imagine it, the heat, the
Yeah.
smoke.
The heat radiating off the timber frames, the smoke is choking the streets, and the panic is just absolute. People are fleeing for their lives, grabbing their children, their gold, their most precious heirlooms, throwing things into the river just to save them.
Total chaos.
And then there's this one guy, a high-ranking government official. And what is his priority in this moment of absolute apocalypse? He runs into his garden to dig a hole. Not to hide himself, no. He is digging a hole to bury his Parmesan cheese.
It is a wonderful, almost surreal image, isn't it? But it captures him so perfectly that cheese was a luxury item, a very expensive Italian import, and he was just not about to let the fire have it.
It's so petty.
It's practical, it's petty, and it's deeply, deeply human.
Exactly. And that man, the man with the shovel and the cheese, is Samuel Pepys. Today, we are diving deep into his life. And honestly, before looking at this source material, I used to think of Pepys as just some, dusty historical figure in a wig.
Yeah, the guy from the fire.
The guy from the fire, exactly. Maybe someone you read a paragraph about in school.
Yeah.
But looking at the massive biographical overview we have today, specifically focusing on his diary and his career, he is so much more than that. He's essentially the ultimate fly on the wall for the 17th century.
Fly on the wall is a good start, but I'd argue he's more than that. He is arguably the greatest diarist of all time. I mean, without him, our understanding of the Restoration period in England, the Great Plague, the Great Fire, the birth of the modern British Navy, it would all be significantly flatter.
It'd be black and white.
It would. He gives us the unfiltered, high-definition 4K version of history. But what makes this deep dive so fascinating is that while he's recording these massive geopolitical events, he's simultaneously recording the most intimate, mundane, and, well, sometimes shockingly scandalous details of his own life.
It is such a wild mix. We're talking about a source material that covers a diary spanning over 1 million words.
1.25 million, to be precise.
1.25 million words. But it also covers his medical history, which is, frankly, terrifying. His rise to power, which is a masterclass in administration, and his personal life, which is, well, complicated.
Complicated is one word for it. It's a study in contradictions. He is a man of intense public service and intense private vice.
So our mission today is to try and figure this guy out. How does a tailor's son become the chief secretary to the Admiralty? Why on earth did he write his diary in code? And what happens when you write down literally everything, every bribe, every affair, every embarrassing thought for 10 years straight?
It really is an interrogation of the human condition, all set during a time of absolute catastrophe.
So let's start at the very beginning. Who was this guy before the diary? Because he didn't, start out as a big shot Navy administrator burying expensive cheese.
No, far from it. Samuel Pepys was born in 1633, right off Fleet Street in London. And his background was, well, it was humble but respectable. His father, John Pepys, was a tailor. His mother, Margaret, was the daughter of a washmaid.
So he isn't born into the aristocracy, not at all.
Not even close. He is thoroughly middle class in a time when social mobility was possible, but, it was extremely difficult.
He wasn't born to power. He really had to work for it.
He did, and you have to remember the context. He was the fifth of 11 children, but, and this tells you something so stark about the era, he was soon the oldest survivor.
11 children.
Child mortality was incredibly high. It was a world where death was just. It was always in the room with you.
Wow. That sets a pretty grim tone right away. But he was educated, right? He wasn't unlearned.
Oh, he was very bright. He went to St. Paul's School in London, which was a prestigious institution, and later to Magdalene College, Cambridge. But there's a detail from his childhood that I think just anchors us in the violence of the time. In 1649, when he was just a schoolboy, he skipped school to attend the execution of King Charles I.
He watched the king get beheaded. As a teenager,
He was there, in the crowd. He saw the axe fall. And he even made a remark later that was quite anti-monarchist, something about how the memory of the wicked king should perish.
which is so ironic considering he spent his adult life serving that king's son, Charles II.
Exactly. But yeah, he wasn't born with a silver spoon. He had connections, specifically a powerful cousin, Edward Montague, who later became the Earl of Sandwich, and that was his foot in the door. But once that door was open, Pepys had to hustle.
Okay, so he's smart, he's ambitious, he's climbing the ladder. But there's this one shadow hanging over his early life that I found absolutely horrifying in the research, We have to talk about the stone.
Ah, yes. The cut of the stone. You simply cannot understand Samuel Pepys without understanding his bladder.
I never thought I'd say that sentence about a historical figure. But let's just pause on the risk of this surgery here. We say surgery today and we think sterile rooms, anesthesiologist, recovery rooms with nurses.
Right.
But in 1658, surgery was practically a spectator sport for the morbid, wasn't it? What are we actually talking about here?
We were talking about something called lithotomy, and it was a specialized trade, actually separate from regular physicians. You have to understand, bladder stones were the scourge of the century because of the diet, lots of meat, bad beer, very little water, cold, damp houses.
As they were common?
Horribly common. Stones would form in the kidneys and drop to the bladder, and without intervention, it was a slow, agonizing death sentence. But the intervention? Well, the mortality rate for the surgery was roughly 20 to 30%.
So a 1 in 3 chance you just don't wake up. Or, you die of infection a week later.
Precisely. And Pepys had suffered since he was a child. Constant pain, blood in the urine, inability to pass water. By the time he was 25, the stone was so large it was ruining his life. He decided to risk the operation.
I can't even imagine making that choice.
He went to a man named Thomas Hollier at St. Thomas's Hospital. Hollier was a lithotomist, a cutter, and the preparation wasn't just show up. Pepys had to purge his system for days with enemas and laxatives. He was weak before he even lay down on the table.
And the table isn't a bed. It's a specific kind of apparatus.
Correct. They didn't just tie him down. They placed him in what's still called the lithotomy position. Knees up, spread wide, ankles bound to wrists. It exposes the perineum, the area between the scrotum and the anus.
Oh, God.
And because there is no anesthesia, maybe a draft of opiate or alcohol, but nothing that actually stops the pain speed is the only mercy. Hollier had to be fast. Incredibly fast.
How fast are we talking? 5 minutes? 10?
Less. Maybe less than 2 minutes for the cut and the extraction. He inserts a metal rod up the urethra to locate the stone by sound. Clink. That tells him where to cut. Then he takes a knife, plunges it into the perineum to find the bladder neck, cuts it open, inserts forceps.
And just pulls the stone out through a 3-inch incision.
While the patient is fully conscious and screaming, 4 strong men held him down. The psychological impact of lying there, helpless, knowing a man is cutting into your most sensitive anatomy with a knife that has likely been used on 10 other people that week, it changed Pepys. It had to have hardened him.
And the stone itself, we skipped over this. It wasn't a pebble. It wasn't a small thing.
No, the source material says it was the size of a tennis ball.
A tennis ball. Inside his bladder. That's physically impossible to imagine.
A 17th-century real tennis ball was a bit smaller than a modern one, but still, we are talking about a jagged, crystallized rock the size of a tangerine or a small apple. The fact that he survived the shock and didn't die of gangrene or sepsis in the days following is a statistical miracle.
And he knew it was a miracle. He kept the stone, didn't he? Like a souvenir.
He did. He had a special case made for it. It wasn't just a souvenir, it was a trophy. He had defeated death. And every year, on the anniversary of the surgery, March 26, he held a stone feast.
A stone feast?
He would invite friends over, bring out the stone, and they would celebrate the fact that he was still breathing.
But such a specific, weird, and wonderful detail. Happy anniversary to my bladder surgery, everyone. But it did leave a mark physically, right? This wasn't a clean recovery.
Indelibly. The incision actually broke open again years later, late in his life. It never fully healed perfectly. And there's very strong speculation that the surgery left him sterile.
Yeah.
The incision through the perineum can easily damage the vas deferens. He and his wife Elizabeth never had children, despite no evidence of fertility issues before the operation.
Which is tragic in its own right, but you mentioned earlier that this might explain his attitude in the Bowery, his whole worldview.
I really think so. When you survive something that painful and that dangerous at age 25, it gives you a certain carpe diem attitude, a seize-the-day mentality. He had this incredible zest for life, for food, for music, for success, for women. That feels like someone who knows he's living on borrowed time.
He's grabbing at life with both hands.
Exactly, because he knows intimately how fragile it is.
That makes a lot of sense. He's living life in high definition because he almost lost it. So, okay, let's get to the thing he's most famous for. The diary. He starts writing it on January 1st, 1660. Why then? What was so special about that day?
The timing was just perfect, historically speaking. England was in complete chaos. Oliver Cromwell had died, his son Richard had failed to hold power, the government was collapsing, it looked like the monarchy might be restored.
A major turning point.
A huge turning point. And Pepys was right there, working for the Navy under his cousin Montague, poised to be part of the transition. He sensed history was happening and he wanted to record it.
And he keeps this diary for almost 10 years. But let's talk about the physical act of writing it. It's not written in plain English, is it? It's not like a journal you buy today.
Mostly not, no. He used a system of shorthand called tachygraphy, which was devised by a man named Thomas Shelton. It looks like little squiggles, dots, and geometric shapes. Very strange to the modern eye.
So was he trying to hide what he was writing? Was this a keep out top secret situation from day one?
Yes and no. I mean, shorthand was common for efficiency. Paper was expensive, candles were expensive, and writing longhand just takes a lot of time. If you're going to write every single day, you want to be fast.
It's a practical choice.
But he definitely used it for privacy, too. And here's where the code gets really interesting. He had a special layer of encryption for the illicit parts of his life, his affairs, his sexual encounters, his darker thoughts about his colleagues.
Oh, right. The famous lingua franca. I've heard about this.
Exactly. When he was describing something scandalous, he wouldn't just use shorthand. He would switch into this pidgin mix of Spanish, French, Italian, and Latin. He might write something like, "Yo did baiser la femme," I did kiss the woman, alongside a shorthand symbol.
He thought he was being so clever and discreet.
He did. But the source material points out the wonderful irony here. He'd be writing in this elaborate code to hide an affair, but then right in the middle, purely out of habit or anger, he'd throw in an English profanity or a very clear name.
So it wasn't the most unbreakable enigma code?
Not at all. It was enough to keep the casual glance of a servant or his wife from immediately understanding, but anyone determined could absolutely crack it.
Which begs the really big question. Did he expect people to read it? Because if I'm writing a diary about how I took a bribe or cheated on my wife, I am burning that thing before I die. No question.
That is the great contradiction of Samuel Pepys. He didn't plan on his contemporaries seeing it. He was terrified of his wife Elizabeth seeing it. But he was a bibliophile, a book collector. He loved his library. And before he died, he carefully cataloged the diary volumes and included them in his library's index.
I put them on the list.
He put them on the list. He even made sure the guide to the Shelton shorthand system he used was included in the library.
No. He left the key to the code right next to the lockbox.
Essentially, yes. He wanted his library preserved exactly as he left it. So deep down, his ego, or his sense of history, demanded that this record survive. He cataloged his own sins for future generations because he believed his life, his entire life, was worth examining.
That is a fascinating duality. Don't look at this now, but please admire it in 200 years. So he starts writing 1660. And the 1660s in London. I mean, if you had to pick a decade to keep a diary, you couldn't pick a more dramatic one.
It is the blockbuster decade of London history. It's just one thing after another. You have the restoration of the king, you have war with the Dutch, you have plague, and you have fire.
Let's talk about the first major disaster, the Great Plague of 1665.
The bubonic plague. It wasn't the first time it had hit London, not by a long shot, but this was the big one, the Great Plague. It killed perhaps 100,000 people, which was roughly a quarter of London's population at the time.
A quarter of the city. Usually when the plague hits, the rich people flee, right? They head to their country estates.
Correct. The king left, the court left, most wealthy merchants packed up and left. Pepys actually sent his wife to Woolwich for her safety, but he stayed in the city, at least initially. He had work to do.
And his descriptions of it are just haunting.
They are, because they focus on the silence. He writes about walking through the city of London and seeing almost no one. The shops are shuttered. The only sound is the church bells tolling for the dead, until eventually even they stopped because there were just too many to ring for.
It sounds like a post-apocalyptic film. He describes seeing doors marked with red crosses.
Yeah. "Lord have mercy upon us." That was the phrase painted on the doors of infected houses. If one person in the house had it, the whole house was boarded up with the family inside for 40 days.
So it's a death sentence for everyone in there.
Pretty much. And Pepys captures the paranoia of it all perfectly. He describes interacting with people. You stand at a distance, you try not to touch the same money, you chew tobacco.
The tobacco thing is interesting. Why tobacco?
There was a popular medical belief that the plague was caused by miasma, basically, bad air or foul smells. So they thought that strong, pungent smells could ward off the infection. So Pepys chewed tobacco constantly as a sort of chemical mask.
And there was a weird detail about wigs in the notes we looked at.
Oh, this is classic Pepys anxiety. It's so telling. He loved fashion. He was very proud of his expensive wigs. But during the plague, he became terrified to wear them. He started wondering, where did the hair come from?
Oh, no.
He worried that the hair used to make the wigs might have been sheared off the heads of plague victims in the pest houses.
Which is a valid concern, honestly.
It is. It's a horrifying thought. But here is the thing about Pepys. He is so complex. While he's writing about the tragedy and the death tolls and his fear of wigs, he's also writing about how great his life is. He writes, and this is almost a direct quote, "I have never lived so merrily, besides that I never got so much as I have done this plague time."
Wait. Never got so much. You mean money?
Yes. The plague year was his most profitable year yet.
He was ghoulish.
Victualling, supplying the Navy. The Second Anglo-Dutch War was ramping up. While everyone else was paralyzed by fear or had fled the city, Pepys was working. He was at his post, organizing contracts for food, beer, timber for the fleet.
So opportunity and chaos.
A huge opportunity. Because the normal oversight mechanisms were disrupted by the plague, he had a much freer hand to negotiate deals and to take his cuts and his gifts. He quadrupled his wealth during the year the city was dying around him.
That is morally complicated, to say the least. Thriving while the city is collapsing.
It captures the survivor mentality, though, doesn't it? Life goes on, business goes on, even in the apocalypse. And to be fair to him, the Navy desperately needed those supplies. If he hadn't done it, the fleet wouldn't have sailed. He was doing his job, and doing it well.
Speaking of apocalypse, we barely get out of the plague when 1666 rolls around. The Great Fire.
The fire that shaped modern London. And Samuel Pepys is our primary, most vivid witness.
So it's 3:00 a.m., September 2nd. His maid, Jane, wakes him up. She sees a fire in the distance.
And Pepys looks out the window, decides it's not that big a deal. It looks far away over by London Bridge, and he goes back to bed.
That is the most relatable thing I've ever heard, is the world ending. Nah, I'm tired.
It just shows how common fires were in a city built of wood and pitch and thatch. But when he wakes up later that morning, it's a different story entirely. He realizes the scale of it. And this is where Pepys becomes a man of action.
He doesn't just watch.
No, he goes to the Tower of London to get a high vantage point. He sees the fire raging, a lamentable fire, as he calls it.
And he sees the pigeons. This stood out to me so much in the source material.
Yes. This is one of those literary details that makes the diary so special, so human. He describes these poor pigeons hovering around their balconies, unwilling to leave their nests, their homes, until their wings literally burn and they fall down into the flames. It's such a poignant, heartbreaking image of reluctance to leave what you know, even when it's destroying you.
It's incredible. But then he stops just watching and he starts doing. He becomes the first person to actually go and tell the king, Charles II, how bad the situation is.
He takes a boat up the Thames to Whitehall. The fire hadn't reached there yet. He marches in, finds the king and the Duke of York, and tells them that unless they order houses to be pulled down to create fire breaks, the whole city is lost.
Pulling down houses seems so extreme.
It's the only way. Blowing them up with gunpowder or pulling them down with these huge hooks, you have to starve the fire of fuel. The Lord Mayor at the time was too afraid to do it because of property rights. He was worried about getting sued.
He's worried about lawsuits while London burns.
Pepys told the king, "You have to authorize this. Now." And the king listened to him. He sent Pepys straight to the Lord Mayor with the royal order.
Imagine the chaos of that scene. He finds the Lord Mayor and the guy is just broken, right?
Completely.
Yeah.
He describes the Lord Mayor, a man named Thomas Bloodworth, as being exhausted, walking around like a man in a daze, crying out, "Lord, what can I do? People will not obey me. I have been pulling down houses, but the fire overtakes us faster than we can do it. It's total anarchy."
So Pepys goes home, and now the fire is getting closer to his own house in Seething Lane. And this leads us back to the beginning, back to the Parmesan cheese.
Yes. As the fire approaches, he has to evacuate his own goods. He sends his money and his wife away to safety. But some things, well, you have to improvise. He digs a pit in his garden. He buries his wine good French vintage and his Parmesan cheese.
He saves the cheese. Did his house survive?
It did, just barely. The fire stopped just before it reached Seething Lane. But he walked through the ruins afterwards. He saw his father's house destroyed, his old school destroyed, the house where he had his stone surgery destroyed. The London of his childhood was just wiped off the map.
It's incredible that we have this first-person record. But we need to shift gears a bit here. We've talked about Pepys the observer, but he was also a worker, a government man. Section 4 of our outline calls him the Navy man.
And this is where his historical significance really lies, outside of the diary. If you take away the diary completely, Samuel Pepys is still a major figure in British history because he essentially professionalized the Royal Navy.
But when he started at the Navy Board as clerk of the Acts, he knew nothing about ships.
Zero maritime experience, he was a clerk. But unlike his colleagues who were often lazy aristocrats or just political appointees, Pepys was diligent. He was a true workaholic. He hired a tutor to teach him arithmetic and multiplication tables.
He taught himself math as an adult.
He did. He bought model ships to understand how the parts fit together, how rigging worked. He learned the business from the hull up. He visited the dockyards. He talked to the sailors. He learned about timber and rope.
He was a technocrat before that was even a word.
Precisely. And the Navy desperately needed it. They were in the middle of the Second Anglo-Dutch War, and things were not going well.
That's putting it mildly. The whole thing was a mess.
It was. And a big part of the problem was that the Navy was chronically underfunded. And this leads to the scandal of the tickets. We need to explain this because it defines the corruption of the era.
Right. So how did sailors get paid back then?
Well, often they didn't. Not in cash, anyway. The king, Charles II, was constantly broke and fighting Parliament for money. So when a sailor returned from a long, dangerous voyage, instead of cash, the Navy Board would give him a ticket. It was essentially an IOU. The king owes you £10.
But a sailor can't buy bread for his family with a ticket. He's starving.
Exactly. So a secondary market pops up. Predatory brokers would stand outside the Navy office and say, "I'll give you £5 cash for your £10 ticket right now." And the sailor, desperate for any money at all, takes the loss just to eat.
That is just... It's predatory. And Pepys was involved in this system.
The whole board was complicit. They knew the tickets were losing value, and guess who was often investing in those brokers? Or facilitating the administrative delays that made the tickets worthless so the price would drop. Pepys absolutely profited from the liquidity crisis of the very men he was managing.
Wow.
When you read the diary, he's terrified of the sailors. He describes them starving in the streets, shouting at him, threatening him. He's afraid of being mobbed because he knows he's part of the problem.
So we call him corrupt because he took money. But was he, like, stealing from the till, or was this something more systemic? Because the line between a bribe and a salary seems incredibly blurry here.
It's incredibly blurry. Navy clerks like Pepys weren't paid a living wage. Their official salary was tiny. They were expected to monetize their position. If someone wanted a contract for timber, they might give Pepys a nice gift, a gratuity.
So it was just part of the job description.
It was. But Pepys established a rule for himself, which he writes about. "I will take the bribe," he decides, "only if the person I'm hiring is actually the best person for the job."
That's a very convenient moral loophole. I'll take your money, but only if you're competent enough to deserve the contract anyway.
It was. But in the 1660s, that was revolutionary. His predecessors took the money and hired their incompetent nephews. Pepys took the money and hired the best shipwright. He rationalized it as efficiency for the state. But yes, his net worth jumped from almost nothing to over £7,500 in 7 years on a £350 salary. The math doesn't lie.
And despite his efficiency, the war went badly. In 1667, there was this massive national humiliation called the Raid on the Medway.
This is the absolute low point for the English Navy in that century. The Dutch fleet, under Admiral de Ruyter, actually sailed up the River Medway, broke through the defensive chain, burned English ships at anchor, and towed away the flagship, the Royal Charles.
That's like someone breaking into your garage and stealing your prized Ferrari while you watch from the window.
It was a national disgrace, and everyone was looking for a scapegoat. The Parliament was furious, and they summoned the entire Navy Board to answer for these miscarriages.
And this is Pepys's big moment, right? He has to defend the indefensible.
On March 5th, 1668, he stood at the bar of the House of Commons. He had prepared for weeks. He stayed up all night. He drank brandy to steady his nerves, and then he spoke for over 3 hours without notes.
3 hours straight.
It was a virtuoso performance. He dazzled them with details, facts, figures, logistics. He essentially proved that the failures weren't the board's fault, but were due to a catastrophic lack of funding from Parliament and strategic errors by the king's commanders. He buried them in data.
He out-bureaucrated the bureaucrats.
He did, and they loved it. He saved his own skin and the boards. He walked out of there a hero. He wrote in his diary that night that he was hailed as the savior of the Navy.
So he's competent. He's a hero administrator, a brilliant, corrupt workaholic.
Yeah.
But we have to pivot to the darker side of his personal life. We can't talk about Pepys without talking about women. And looking at this through a modern lens, a Me Too lens, it is pretty disturbing stuff.
It is, and we have to be clear here. For a long time, historians sort of winked at Pepys's affairs as dalliances or the behavior of a lusty rogue. But the source material, his own words, detail behavior that is, by any modern definition, sexual harassment and sexual assault.
Let's start with his marriage first.
Elizabeth de Saint-Michel. She was the daughter of French Huguenot exiles, and she was only 14 when they married. He was 22.
That age gap and her youth sets up a dynamic of control right from the start.
It absolutely did. And their relationship was incredibly volatile. The diary shows they loved each other. They played music together. He taught her to sing and play instruments, but they fought constantly. He was intensely jealous of other men even looking at her, and she had every reason to be jealous of him.
Because he was constantly cheating on her.
Constantly. The diary is a catalog of it. He pursued shop girls, the wives of his colleagues, servants in his own house, actresses, and he wrote it all down in meticulous, often sordid detail.
There's one specific incident that seems to be the climax of this domestic drama, the Deb Willett affair.
This is the moment the diary becomes a full-blown domestic tragedy. Deb Willett was a young woman, a teenager, who was hired to be a companion for Elizabeth, and Pepys became obsessed with her.
And he got caught.
Oh, red-handed. On October 25, 1668, Elizabeth walked in on them unexpectedly and found Pepys embracing Deb Willett. He writes, and he uses his most secret code here, that his hand was under her coats.
Elizabeth must have gone nuclear.
She did. She was devastated and furious. She screamed at him. She threatened to leave him. She threatened to shame him publicly by telling everyone. He describes her in a rage, threatening him with hot tongs from the fireplace.
Wow.
Pepys was filled with remorse. He cried. He begged for forgiveness. He swore it would never happen again.
But did he stop?
No, that's the thing. Deb Willett was fired, obviously, but Pepys continued to try to find her and meet her secretly. It shows this compulsive, destructive side to his behavior that even his own guilt couldn't control.
And you mentioned earlier the darker side of this. It wasn't always, consensual affairs with women of his own class.
No, not at all. The modern scholarly analysis points out that he often targeted women who were socially and economically inferior to him, servants, subordinates' wives. He would mask his coercion as being playful or kind. He would fondle his maid, Mary Mercer, while she was helping him get dressed in the morning.
And because he was the boss, the master of the house, what could she do? She couldn't really say no without losing her job, her home.
Exactly. There was an inherent power imbalance. He believed, as many men of his time did, that he was entitled to access to women's bodies. When a shipwright's wife named Lane, who he had a transaction with, claimed he assaulted her, he dismissed it in his diary as her being false, not because he claimed he didn't do it, but because he felt she had no moral right to complain.
It's important we don't gloss over that. He's a historical genius, but he was also, in many ways, a predator.
You have to hold both those truths at the same time to understand him.
So the diary ends in May 1669. Why? He lived a lot longer than that.
This is the great irony and the great tragedy for historians. He stopped writing because he thought he was going blind.
The strain of writing all those tiny shorthand characters by candlelight.
Yes. His eyes were paining him constantly. He was terrified. He wrote this heartbreaking final entry saying that to stop the diary is almost as much as to see myself go into my grave. He thought he would be totally blind within months.
But he wasn't.
No. He lived another 34 years. He never went blind. The current theory is that it was likely just severe eye strain or a condition like presbyopia that resolved itself as he stopped doing the intense close work of the shorthand. But for whatever reason, he never picked up the diary again.
That is such a loss for history. Imagine what we missed in those next 3 decades. Because he didn't just retire to the garden and grow roses, did he?
Not at all. His second act is arguably even more impressive in terms of public service. He became a member of Parliament. He eventually rose to become the secretary to the Admiralty, the big boss, the top job. But it wasn't smooth sailing.
You mentioned he was imprisoned.
Twice. The guy who saved the Navy with his big speech got thrown in the Tower of London.
Why? What on earth for...
Politics and religion. In the late 1670s, there was this national hysteria about a popish plot, a supposed Catholic conspiracy to assassinate the king. And Pepys was accused, by his political enemies, of being a secret Catholic and selling naval secrets to the French.
Was there any truth to it?
None at all. It was all fabricated. But in that climate of hysteria, people were being tried and executed on far less evidence. He spent weeks in the tower, genuinely fearing for his life.
That must have been terrifying considering he watched Charles I get executed as a boy. He knew what could happen.
He had to use all his administrative skills and his connections to save himself. He investigated his main accuser, a con man named Colonel Scott, and he proved he was a fraud. He gathered dossiers of evidence. He basically lawyered his way out of a death sentence.
And he didn't just survive politically, he thrived in the intellectual world too. He became president of the Royal Society.
Which is a huge deal. The Royal Society was the premier scientific organization in the world at that time. And here's a fact that just blows people's minds. If you look at the title page of Isaac Newton's Principia Mathematica, one of the most important books in the entire history of science, whose name is on the cover, authorizing its publication.
Don't tell me it's Samuel Pepys.
It is. Imprimatur, S. Pepys. Red, Sacco, Brazes. Samuel Pepys, president of the Royal Society. His name is on the book that gave us the laws of motion and universal gravitation.
That is absolutely amazing. But I want to dig into this famous correspondence with Isaac Newton. It's 1693. Pepys is retired. Newton is, well, he's Isaac Newton. And Pepys writes to him about dice. This isn't just, hey, want to play craps, right? This was a serious question.
No, it was a very specific probability query. This is now known as the Newton-Pepys problem. Pepys was likely asking on behalf of a gambling friend who is a bit of a high roller. The question is essentially this: which of these three scenarios offers you the best odds of winning?
Okay, lay it on me.
Scenario A, rolling at least 1 6 when you toss 6 dice. Scenario B, rolling at least 2 6s when you toss 12 dice. Or Scenario C, rolling at least 3 6s when you toss 18 dice.
Okay, so my intuition says they are all the same, right? 1 required success in 6 dice, 2 and 12, 3 and 18. It's all a 1/6 ratio.
That's exactly what Pepys thought. He was a man of simple arithmetic, and he assumed the probability was identical for all three. But Newton wrote back and said, no, you are completely wrong.
Because probability isn't linear like that. It gets more complicated.
Correct. Newton explained that with 6 dice, the odds of getting at least 1 6 are actually quite high. It's about 66.5%. But as you add more dice and require more specific outcomes, like 2 6s or 3 6s, the difficulty scales up much faster than the number of dice helps you. He showed that Scenario A was the best bet.
Did Pepys understand the math? Because I'm not sure I do.
Not really. Newton tried to explain it with pages of arithmetic, but Pepys kept writing back saying, essentially, I still don't get it. Eventually, Newton basically said, look, just trust me on this. Take the first bet.
It's weirdly comforting to know that even Samuel Pepys, the man who organized the entire British Navy, couldn't wrap his head around high-level statistics.
It highlights the massive intellectual shift happening in that era. Pepys was a man of lists and catalogs, an accumulator of facts. Newton was a man of abstract principles and universal laws. You see the old world trying to organize itself and the new world of modern science emerging.
So Pepys lives until 1703. He retires to a place called Clapham.
A nice country retreat just outside London back then.
And when he dies, he leaves behind this incredible library, his life's passion.
3,000 volumes, all perfectly preserved, and he was so incredibly particular about them, he didn't just leave them to his old college, Magdalene. He left pages of instructions on how they should be shelved.
I read this. It's amazing. He wanted them arranged by size, right? Not by subject.
Yes, purely for aesthetics. He specified that little books should be placed on top of big books if necessary to make the tops of all the books level. And he had special wooden blocks made, almost like little high heels, to put behind the shorter books so the spines would all line up perfectly flush at the front of the shelf.
That is some serious type A personality right there. Obsessive.
It is. But that obsessive nature, that need to catalog and control and preserve everything perfectly, is exactly why the diary survived. He treated his life like he treated his books. It had to be organized, cataloged, and preserved for posterity.
And the diary volumes are still there in the original bookcases he designed at Cambridge. You can go and see them today.
Exactly as he left them.
That's incredible. So we've looked at the man, the stone, the fire, the affairs, and the ships. It's been quite a journey.
It really has.
Let's try to sum this up. If you had to describe him in a sentence, who is Samuel Pepys?
He is a man of profound contradictions. He's a diligent, brilliant bureaucrat who built the modern Navy, but he's also a corrupt official taking bribes. He's a devoted husband who clearly loves his wife, but he's a serial philanderer and, by our standards, a predator. He's a man terrified of the plague, yet he stays in London and makes a fortune from it.
He's human, messy, brilliant, flawed, and deeply recognizably human.
And that's why we're still talking about him 300 years later. Most historical figures, we only see the statue in the park. We see the great man on a pedestal. With Pepys, we see the guy in his nightgown worried about his bladder, fighting with his wife and burying his cheese.
It brings history down to a human level.
It does. It makes it real.
So here is the final thought I want to leave everyone with. Pepys wrote this diary for himself, but he cataloged it for the future. He made a conscious choice to let it survive. He wanted to be remembered, warts and all. It raises a really uncomfortable question for us, I think. If you recorded your daily life with total honesty, every weakness, every shady deal, every embarrassing thought, every hand-under-coats moment, would you want history to read it?
It's a terrifying thought. Most of us would hit delete.
We would. So is Pepys unique simply because he possessed the ego to believe that his life, his tennis ball stone, his wig anxiety, and his buried Parmesan cheese were actually worth remembering? Maybe that's his greatest legacy. Just the sheer audacity to believe his own flawed, complicated life mattered.
I think you might be right. The courage to be seen.
Thanks for listening to this deep dive into Samuel Pepys. We'll see you next time.